The creek behind Xavier's cabin had been bone dry for 7 days, and he knew exactly where the problem started. Standing at the edge of his property line in the late afternoon of August 1873, watching the sun beat down mercilessly on the parched California earth, he surveyed the mountain terrain with narrowed eyes that had seen 28 hard winters. His massive frame, all corded muscle and broad shoulders beneath a sweat-stained shirt, tensed as he contemplated the trek upstream to where the water flow had been choked off. The gold mining operation he ran depended on that creek, and without water, his sluice boxes sat useless, and his livelihood dried up along with the stream. Finn had built his life in these mountains north of Redding through sheer determination and the kind of physical labor that had shaped his body into something formidable. His hair, dark as midnight and falling just past his collar, was tied back with a leather cord to keep it from his face. Scars marked his hands and forearms, testaments to years of working rock and timber in unforgiving country. He had come west after the war, looking for something he could build with his own 2 hands, something that belonged to nobody but himself. The isolation suited him. Most days he saw nothing but pine trees, granite slopes, and the occasional deer. He had grown comfortable with solitude, or so he told himself. But this water situation could not stand. He needed to investigate the blockage, and he needed to do it before another day passed. Grabbing his axe and a coil of rope, Finn set out upstream, following the dry creek bed through increasingly rough terrain. The August heat pressed down on him like a physical weight, but he was accustomed to it. His boots found purchase on rocks worn smooth by years of water flow, now exposed and dusty. The silence where rushing water should have been felt unnatural, wrong. After an hour of steady climbing, he heard something unexpected, the sound of cracking wood and a woman's voice, rough with exertion, muttering words he could not quite make out. Finn slowed his approach, moving quietly through the pines until he had a clear view of the obstruction. What he saw made him stop in his tracks completely. The logjam was massive, at least 15 feet across and piled 10 feet high with dead timber, branches, and debris that had accumulated over time and finally created a natural dam. Behind it, water had pooled into a small lake, flooding what had once been a narrow gorge. And standing knee-deep in that water, her back to him, was a woman systematically tearing the jam apart with nothing but her bare hands. She was tall for a woman, perhaps 5'8", with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in wet ropes down her back. Her dress, a practical calico that had once been blue, was soaked through and torn at the hem. But what struck Finn most was the determined ferocity with which she worked. She would grasp a log, brace her feet against the rocks beneath the water, and pull with her entire body until the timber shifted. Then she would push it aside, let it float downstream, and immediately reach for the next piece. Finn watched in stunned silence as she freed a log that must have weighed 100 pounds, her arms shaking with the effort, but her grip never faltering. Her hands had to be raw, probably bleeding, but she did not slow down. There was something almost desperate in the way she worked, as though the logjam was not just an obstacle, but a personal enemy that had to be conquered. "You are going to hurt yourself," Finn called out, finally finding his voice. The woman spun around so fast she nearly lost her footing in the current. Her eyes, he saw, were a striking hazel that seemed to shift between green and gold in the filtered sunlight. Her face was flushed from exertion, dirt smudged across one cheek, and her expression was equal parts startled and defiant. She could not have been more than 24 or 25, though the set of her jaw suggested someone who had already faced down considerable hardship. "Who are you?" she demanded, not releasing her grip on the log she had been wrestling. "I could ask you the same question," Finn replied, taking a few steps closer to the water's edge. "This is my creek you are clearing. Your creek?" The woman's eyes flashed with indignation. "Water does not belong to any one person. It flows where it flows. Maybe so, but this particular flow runs through my property, and I have been waiting a week for it to come back. Not that I am complaining about your efforts, but you are going to tear your hands to pieces working like that." She looked down at her hands as though only just remembering they existed. They were indeed bleeding, the palms scraped raw and several fingers showing splits in the skin. But instead of stopping, she turned back to the logjam with renewed determination. "I have to keep going. This has to be cleared before nightfall." "Why?" Finn asked. Genuinely curious, he set down his axe and rope, wading into the water himself. Up close, he could see that she was trembling slightly, whether from exhaustion or something else, he could not tell. Because I need this water flowing again, she said through gritted teeth, attacking another section of the jam. My land is downstream, about 2 miles past your property. I have crops dying in the ground and animals with nothing to drink. Every day this stays blocked is another day closer to losing everything. Finn understood immediately. The drought had been hard on everyone, and a week without water could indeed be catastrophic for someone trying to work a small farm. He moved alongside her, positioning himself at one of the larger logs. "Step aside," he said, not unkindly. "Let me get this one." "I do not need your help," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Her hands were shaking badly now, blood mixing with creek water and running down her wrists. "Maybe not," Finn agreed, "but you are getting it anyway." With that, he wrapped both arms around the log she had been struggling with and pulled. The muscles in his back and shoulders bunched and strained, his feet digging into the rocky creek bed. The log resisted at first, wedged tight in the tangle, but Finn adjusted his grip and pulled again with a grunt of effort. This time it gave way with a splintering crack, and he wrestled it free from the jam, sending it floating downstream. The woman stared at him with an expression that mixed gratitude with frustration. "I had it," she said stubbornly. "I am sure you did," Finn replied, already moving to the next piece. "But this will go faster with 2 people, and judging by your hands, you do not have much time left before you will not be able to grip anything at all." For a moment he thought she would argue further. Then her shoulders sagged slightly, and she nodded. "Fine. But I am not some helpless female who needs rescuing." "Never said you were," Finn responded, meaning it. Anyone who would climb into a mountain creek and tear apart a log jam with their bare hands was about as far from helpless as a person could get. "I am Finn Xavier. I run a mining claim about a mile downstream from here." "Rose Kensington," she said after a brief hesitation. "I have a homestead at the base of the mountain, near where the creek widens out into the valley." They worked in tandem then, Finn handling the heavier pieces while Rose focused on clearing the smaller branches and debris that knitted the jam together. Despite her injured hands, she worked with impressive efficiency, seeming to understand instinctively which pieces were holding the structure together and which could be safely removed. Finn found himself stealing glances at her as they labored, noting the determined set of her mouth and the way she pushed wet hair back from her face with the back of her wrist to avoid using her torn palms. "How long have you been at this?" he asked after they had cleared about a third of the obstruction. "Since noon," Rose admitted. "I woke up this morning and realized the water still had not come back. I knew there had to be a blockage somewhere upstream, so I just started walking the creek bed until I found it." Finn glanced up at the sun. It was past 4 in the afternoon now. "You have been pulling logs for 4 hours straight?" "Seemed like the thing to do," she said with a slight shrug, then winced as the movement pulled at her scraped shoulders. Her dress had torn there too, he noticed, the fabric giving way under the strain of her labor. "You are either incredibly determined or completely out of your mind," Finn observed, but there was admiration in his tone rather than criticism. "Probably both," Rose allowed, and he caught the ghost of a smile on her lips before she bent back to her task. They fell into a rhythm, speaking little but moving in coordination, that felt surprisingly natural. Finn would brace himself against the current and heave a large log free, and Rose would immediately move in to clear the smaller pieces that tumbled loose in its wake. Gradually, methodically, they dismantled the jam. The water level behind the dam began to drop as flow resumed through the gaps they created, and the creek started to sing again, that particular music of water moving over stone that Finn had not realized he had missed until it returned. By the time the sun started painting the western sky in shades of orange and pink, they had cleared enough that the remaining structure began to fail on its own, the water pressure doing the work for them. With a final groaning crack, the last major section of the jam gave way, and what had been a plugged gorge became a rushing creek once more. The released water surged downstream, carrying with it the last of the debris. Rose stood in the middle of the flow, water swirling around her knees, and let out a long breath that might have been relief or exhaustion or both. Her shoulders dropped, and for the first time since Finn had arrived, she stopped moving. She just stood there, watching the water flow, her ruined hands hanging at her sides. "You did it," Finn said, coming to stand beside her. "The creek is running again. We did it," Rose corrected, turning to face him. Up close, with the golden light of sunset falling across her features, Finn noticed details he had missed before. The fine lines at the corners of her eyes that came from squinting into the sun. the firm set of her jaw that spoke of stubborn pride. The way her lips were chapped from sun and wind, the mark of someone who spent their days outdoors. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about her face, something that spoke of strength and determination and a refusal to yield. "Come on," Finn said, offering her his arm. "Let me at least help you back downstream. You can barely stand, and those hands need tending." Rose looked like she wanted to refuse, but another wave of visible trembling passed through her, and she reluctantly took his arm. Her grip was weak, the strength that had sustained her through hours of labor finally exhausted. Finn kept his pace slow as they made their way down the creek bank, following the newly restored flow of water. The rocks were slippery now, and more than once Rose stumbled, but Finn's steady presence kept her upright. "I do not usually accept help from strangers," Rose said after they had walked in silence for several minutes. "I noticed," Finn replied, "but I am your neighbor, which technically makes me not a stranger." "A neighbor I have never met in 6 months of living here," Rose pointed out. "I keep to myself mostly," Finn admitted. "Mining is solitary work and I prefer it that way." "Why?" The question was direct, almost challenging. Finn considered his answer carefully. "Got tired of people during the war. Spent 4 years surrounded by more bodies than any person should have to see. When it was over, I wanted space, room to breathe. These mountains provided that." Rose was quiet for a moment, processing this. "You fought?" "2nd Wisconsin Cavalry," Finn confirmed. "You?" "I was too young for the war," Rose said, "but I remember it. My father went and did not come back. My older brother went and came back different, angry all the time, drinking. He lost our family farm in Missouri in a card game 2 years ago. That is why I am here. Started over with nothing but what I could carry." "You came to California alone?" Finn could not hide his surprise. "Had a husband," Rose said flatly, "for about 6 weeks. Then he decided homesteading was harder than he thought, and the gold fields looked more promising. Left me with the land and a note saying he would send for me when he struck it rich." Her laugh was bitter. "That was 5 months ago. I am not holding my breath." Finn felt a flash of anger toward this unknown man who would abandon his wife in the wilderness. "That is," he struggled for words that were not profanity, "that is unforgivable." "It is what it is," Rose said with forced pragmatism. "I have the land legally in my name now, filed the proper papers in Reading. Whatever that coward does or does not do with his life, the homestead is mine. I will make it work." The fierce determination in her voice told Finn she meant every word. This was not a woman who would give up easily, if at all. They reached the edge of Finn's property as full darkness began to fall, and he made a decision. "My cabin is closer than your homestead. Let me at least clean those hands and wrap them properly. Then I will walk you home." Rose looked like she would refuse, but glanced down at her hands in the fading light and seemed to recognize the necessity. "All right," she agreed quietly, "but just the bandaging. I need to get back to check on my animals." Finn's cabin was small but solidly built, constructed from logs he had cut and fitted himself. A single room served as living space, kitchen, and sleeping area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a narrow bed at the other. It was spartanly furnished but scrupulously clean, everything in its place. He lit a lamp and gestured for Rose to sit at the rough-hewn table while he retrieved his medical supplies. "This is going to hurt," Finn warned as he poured clean water into a basin and added a measure of whiskey. "But infection is worse, so try to hold still." Rose nodded, extending her hands palm up. In the lamplight, the damage was even more apparent. Deep scrapes covered both palms, and several fingers showed cuts that would need to be wrapped individually. Finn took her right hand first, cradling it gently in his much larger one, and began carefully cleaning the wounds. Rose sucked in a sharp breath when the alcohol hit the raw flesh but did not pull away. "You are tougher than most men I have known," Finn observed as he worked, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone with such large, work-hardened hands. "Pain is just sensation," Rose said through gritted teeth. "You can acknowledge it without letting it stop you. Where did you learn that philosophy?" "Childbirth," Rose said bluntly, and Finn's hands stilled for just a moment. She continued before he could ask the obvious question. "Had a daughter 3 years ago. She lived 2 days, born too early, too small. Nothing anyone could do." Her voice was steady, but Finn heard the ocean of grief beneath those simple words. "I am sorry," he said quietly, resuming his careful cleaning of her wounds. "So am I," Rose replied. "But you survive or you do not. I chose to survive." Finn finished with her right hand and started on her left. As he worked, he found himself intensely aware of her presence, the way she sat straight back despite her obvious exhaustion. the faint scent of creek water and pine that clung to her skin, the little catch in her breathing when he touched a particularly tender spot. He wrapped each hand carefully in clean cloth strips, tying them off securely but not so tight as to cut off circulation. "There," he said when he finished. "Keep them dry if you can and change the bandages tomorrow. If you see any red streaks or feel excessive heat, that means infection. Come find me immediately if that happens." "I will be fine," Rose insisted, standing. But when she tried to take a step, her legs nearly gave out. Finn caught her by the elbow, steadying her. "When did you last eat?" he asked, suddenly realizing the likely answer. Rose's silence confirmed his suspicion. "This morning, before dawn. I had coffee and some cornbread. That was 16 hours ago, and you have been doing heavy labor for 4 of them," Finn said, shaking his head. "Sit back down. I am making you something before you try to walk another 2 miles in the dark." "I do not need," Rose began. I know you do not need help," Finn interrupted. "Consider it payment for clearing my creek. I was going to have to do that job myself, and you saved me probably 2 days of work. Let me at least feed you in thanks." Put that way, framed as reciprocity rather than charity, Rose reluctantly resumed her seat. Finn moved to his small kitchen area and began assembling a simple meal. He had venison from a deer he had brought down 3 days prior, plus potatoes, onions, and a precious bit of butter he had traded for in Reading. He sliced the meat thin and fried it in a pan along with the vegetables, filling the small cabin with savory smells. As he cooked, they talked. Rose told him more about her homestead, the 30 acres of land she was trying to cultivate mostly by herself. She had planted beans, squash, and corn, vegetables that could survive with minimal attention and provide sustenance through the winter. She kept 3 chickens for eggs, a goat for milk, and a mule named Stubborn who lived up to his name. She hauled her own water, chopped her own wood, and had taught herself basic carpentry to keep her small house from falling apart. "Sounds lonely," Finn observed, dividing the food onto 2 tin plates. "Says the man who lives alone on a mountain," Rose countered, accepting the plate he offered. "At least I can walk to Reading in a day if I need supplies or company." "How often do you go into town?" "Once a month maybe," Finn admitted. "Less in winter." They ate in companionable silence for a while. Finn watched Rose attack her food with single-minded focus, only then realizing how truly hungry she must have been. He quietly served her a second helping, which she accepted without comment. Color began returning to her face, and the trembling in her shoulders gradually subsided. "Thank you," Rose said when she finally pushed her empty plate away. "For the food and the bandaging, and for helping with the jam." "Like I said, you saved me a job," Finn replied, "though I would have used an axe and rope instead of my bare hands." "I did not exactly plan it that way," Rose said with the hint of a smile. "I left in a hurry this morning, only thinking about finding the blockage. Did not occur to me to bring tools until I was already 2 hours upstream, and then you were too stubborn to go back for them," Finn guessed. "Stubborn is what my mule is named, not me," Rose protested, but her smile widened slightly. "If you say so." Finn stood and retrieved a spare canvas jacket from a peg by the door. "Here, put this on. Your dress is still wet and the temperature drops fast after sunset." Rose accepted the jacket, which hung large on her frame but provided welcome warmth. Then Finn gathered a lantern and his rifle, and they set out into the night. The newly restored creek sang beside them as they walked, a constant rushing presence in the darkness. Finn kept the lantern high and his pace measured to match Rose's exhausted gait. The moon was rising, nearly full, by the time Rose's homestead came into view. It was a modest setup, just as she had described. A small cabin with a lean-to for animals, a fenced garden plot, and cleared land extending into the darkness beyond the reach of the lantern light. A goat bleated from the lean-to at their approach, and Finn heard the rustling of chickens settling for the night. "This is me," Rose said, stating the obvious because something needed to be said. She shrugged out of Finn's jacket and held it out to him. "Thank you again for everything." Finn took the jacket but did not immediately turn to leave. "I will check on you tomorrow," he said. "Make sure those hands are healing properly." "That is not necessary," Rose began. "Probably not," Finn agreed, "but I am going to do it anyway. Neighborly responsibility and all that." Rose studied him in the moonlight, her expression unreadable. "You are not what I expected from a mountain man miner. What did you expect?" "Someone rougher, I suppose. More, I do not know. Wild, maybe." Finn laughed at that, a low rumble in his chest. "I am plenty rough, is Rose Kensington, but my mother raised me to have some manners, and army service taught me the value of field medicine. Does not make me civilized, just practical." "I see," Rose said softly. She hesitated, then added, I would not mind if you checked on the homestead tomorrow. It is nice to have someone nearby who gives a damn whether I live or die." The stark honesty of that statement hit Finn harder than he expected. He realized that Rose had been functioning in complete isolation for months, abandoned by her husband and making a go of it alone in unforgiving country. The loneliness must have been crushing, even for someone as determined as she clearly was. "I give a damn," Finn said simply, "so I will see you tomorrow. Afternoon probably, after I run my sluice boxes for a few hours." Rose nodded, and Finn thought he saw something like relief in her eyes before she turned toward her cabin. He waited until she was safely inside and had lit a lamp before starting back toward his own place. The walk gave him time to think, and he found his thoughts circling back to Rose with surprising persistence. There was something about her, something beyond her obvious physical strength and determination. A kind of fierce integrity, maybe, or a refusal to be beaten down by circumstances that would have broken lesser people. Finn reached his cabin well past midnight, tired but strangely energized. He lay in bed listening to the restored creek flowing outside his window and found himself looking forward to the next day in a way he had not anticipated anything in a long time. True to his word, Finn appeared at Rose's homestead the following afternoon. He brought fresh bandages and a jar of salve he had traded for months ago, which was supposed to prevent scarring. Rose was in her garden when he arrived, trying to assess which plants might be salvaged now that water was flowing again. She had rigged a crude irrigation system using the creek and split logs to carry water to her crops, but a week of drought had done serious damage. "How are the hands?" Finn called out as he approached. Rose held them up, still wrapped in yesterday's bandages. "Sore, but I have been through worse." "Let me see," Finn said, and Rose came to meet him at the edge of the garden. He unwrapped her hands carefully, pleased to see that while the wounds looked painful, there was no sign of infection. He applied the salve liberally, his calloused fingers gentle despite their size, then rewrapped everything with fresh cloth. "You do not have to keep coming here," Rose said, but her tone lacked conviction. "Maybe I want to," Finn replied, surprising himself with his own honesty. "Gets lonely up on that mountain, like you said. Nice to have someone to talk to besides myself." Rose studied him for a long moment. "All right then. If you are going to be here, you might as well make yourself useful. I need to shore up the wall on the lean-to before winter, and it would go faster with 2 people." So began a pattern that would define the rest of that summer. Finn would work his claim in the mornings, running his sluice boxes and processing gravel in the search for gold. Then most afternoons he would make his way to Rose's homestead and help with whatever project she had in progress. Together they reinforced her lean-to, expanded her chicken coop, and built a proper irrigation system that would survive the winter freezes. Finn brought his tools and his strength, while Rose provided the planning and an endless supply of determination. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and silences with equal comfort. Finn learned that Rose had grown up on a farm in Missouri, the second of 5 children. She had learned to read from her mother and to work land from her father, and had married young at 18 to a man who seemed stable and ambitious. That first husband had died in a barn fire just a year into their marriage. The second husband, the one who had brought her west and then abandoned her, she spoke of rarely and with barely concealed contempt. For his part, Finn shared stories of his own past sparingly. He had grown up in Wisconsin, the oldest of 3 boys, and had been expected to take over the family farm. The war had changed those plans irrevocably. He had seen things in those 4 years that still visited him in nightmares, though he did not say so directly. After mustering out, he had drifted west like so many other veterans, looking for something he could not quite name. The mountains had provided it, or at least a reasonable substitute. August faded into September, and the brutal summer heat gave way to cooler days. Rose's crops recovered from their week without water, and she began harvesting beans and squash. Finn's claim was producing moderately well, enough to justify the effort if not to make him rich, and somehow, without either of them quite acknowledging it, they had become part of each other's daily routines. Finn found himself thinking about Rose at odd moments, the way she pushed hair back from her face when concentrating, her laugh, which was rare but genuine when it came, the strength in her shoulders as she swung a hammer or carried water buckets. He had not felt attracted to a woman in years, had convinced himself that he was better off alone, but Rose was different. She did not expect anything from him except honest work and honest conversation. She did not try to change him or civilize him. She accepted him exactly as he was, and he did the same for her. Rose, for her part, was acutely aware of Finn's presence in ways that both confused and slightly frightened her. She had been hurt badly, first by death and then by abandonment, and had armored her heart accordingly. But Finn had a way of slipping past her defenses without even trying. It was in the small things, the way he always asked before touching her, even just to check her healing hands. The care he took with her animals, greeting Stubborn the mule by name and slipping treats to the chickens. The fact that he showed up when he said he would, every single time. A reliability so foreign to her experience that it took weeks before she stopped expecting him to disappear. One evening in late September, as they sat on the steps of Rose's cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Finn finally voiced what had been building between them for weeks. "Rose," he said carefully, "I want to be clear about something." She turned to look at him, her expression guarded. "What is that?" "I am not your husband," Finn said. "I am not trying to replace him or stake some kind of claim on your land or your life. But he paused, searching for the right words. "I care about what happens to you, more than I have cared about anyone in a long time. And if you would let me, I would like to keep being part of your life, not out of obligation or neighborly duty, because I want to be." Rose was quiet for so long that Finn thought he had made a terrible mistake. Then she said, very softly, "I care about you too, but I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of trusting someone again," Rose admitted, "of letting someone matter, because when they leave or die or disappoint you, it hurts so much. I do not know if I can survive that kind of hurt again." Finn considered this, understanding the fear because he carried a version of it himself. "I cannot promise I will never disappoint you," he said honestly. "I am just a man and men are fallible, but I can promise I will not abandon you. I am here, Rose. For as long as you will have me, I am here." Rose reached out with one still healing hand and took his, threading their fingers together. "All right," she said. "Let us see where this goes." It was not a declaration of love or a commitment to marriage. It was simply an agreement to stop pretending they were just neighbors doing each other the occasional favor. It was permission to become something more, whatever that might turn out to be. As autumn deepened and the first frosts touched the high country, Finn and Rose's relationship continued to evolve. Finn began spending some nights at Rose's cabin, sleeping on the floor by the fire at first, though eventually Rose invited him to share her narrow bed. They came together slowly, carefully, both carrying wounds that made them cautious, but there was tenderness between them and a growing sense of rightness. One October morning, Finn woke before dawn to find Rose already up, standing at the window and staring out at the darkness. He rose quietly and came to stand behind her, not touching but close enough that she would know he was there. "What is wrong?" he asked softly. Rose was silent for a moment. Then, "It has been a year since my daughter died. October 15th, 3 days from now." Finn felt the weight of that anniversary settle over them. "Do you want to talk about her?" "I named her Mary," Rose said quietly, "after my mother. She had dark hair, even though she was so small, and her hands were perfect, tiny but perfect. She tried so hard to breathe, to live, but her lungs were not ready." Rose's voice cracked. "I held her until the end. I wanted her to know she was loved, even if she could not stay." Finn wrapped his arms around Rose from behind, holding her as she wept. He said nothing because there was nothing to say that would ease that kind of pain. He just held her and let her grieve. On October 15th, Finn and Rose walked together to a high meadow above her property, a place where wildflowers grew thick in spring and the view stretched for miles. Rose had brought a small wooden cross that Finn had helped her carve, and they buried it there, marking a place to remember even though there was no body to bury. They stood together in the autumn cold, and Finn said a prayer his mother had taught him, words about mercy and peace and eternal rest. "Thank you," Rose said as they walked back down the mountain hand in hand, "for being here, for not trying to tell me it will be all right or that I should be over it by now." "Grief does not follow a schedule," Finn replied, "and some losses never stop hurting. They just become part of who you are." Rose squeezed his hand. "You understand?" "I do," Finn said, thinking of brothers in arms who had not made it home, of friends whose names he still whispered sometimes in the dark. "I do." The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that melted by afternoon but served as warning of what was to come. Finn and Rose spent a frantic 2 weeks preparing for winter, gathering firewood, securing buildings, and stockpiling supplies. Finn insisted that Rose spend the worst of the winter months at his cabin, which was more solidly built and better positioned to withstand heavy snow. Rose resisted at first, reluctant to abandon her homestead, but Finn pointed out that the animals could be moved and the cabin would be fine empty for a few months. Besides, he said with a slight smile, if we are going to be snowed in together for weeks at a time, we should be somewhere with enough space to not drive each other insane. Your cabin is not exactly spacious, Rose pointed out. No, Finn agreed, but it has a better fireplace and thicker walls, and I have several months' worth of supplies already stored. It makes more sense. Rose finally agreed, and they spent a cold late November day moving her chickens, goat, and mule up to Finn's property, along with as many of her supplies and personal possessions as they could transport. Finn cleared space in his cabin for her things, pleased to see his solitary living space transformed into something more communal. The first major storm hit 3 days after Rose moved in, a howling blizzard that dumped 2 feet of snow overnight and showed no signs of stopping. Finn and Rose woke to a world transformed, white and silent except for the wind. They were effectively trapped for the duration, which turned out to be 5 days. Those 5 days, isolated and alone together, marked a turning point. With nothing to do but tend animals, keep the fire going, and wait out the storm, they had nothing but time to talk, to learn each other's patterns and preferences. Finn discovered that Rose sang while cooking, soft folk songs from her childhood that filled the cabin with unexpected warmth. Rose learned that Finn read the same 3 books over and over, a tattered collection of Shakespeare plays, a Bible, and a volume of Whitman poems, until he could recite passages from memory. They made love during that storm, slowly and thoroughly, learning each other's bodies with the kind of attention that only time and privacy allow. Afterward, lying tangled together in Finn's bed while snow continued to fall outside, Rose said, "I think I am falling in love with you." Finn turned to look at her, reading the vulnerability in her eyes. "Think?" he teased gently. "You are not sure?" "I am sure," Rose corrected. "I am just scared to say it out loud. Makes it real." "I love you too," Finn said, the words coming easier than he had expected. "Have for a while now, if I am being honest. Probably since the day I watched you tear apart that log jam with your bare hands." Rose laughed at that, the sound bright in the small cabin. "That is a strange moment to fall in love with someone." "Not so strange," Finn disagreed. "Showed me exactly who you are. Strong, determined, unwilling to wait for someone else to solve your problems. I respected the hell out of that. Still do. I could not have cleared it without you," Rose reminded him. "Maybe not," Finn allowed. "But you would have tried until your hands fell off. That is who you are." They married in January, a simple ceremony performed by a traveling preacher who came through Reading once every few months. The only witnesses were the general store owner and his wife. But it did not matter. What mattered was the vow they made to each other to stand together through whatever life brought, to be partners in truth as well as name. Rose became Rose Xavier that day, and Finn felt something in his chest that he had thought long dead come back to life. Hope maybe, or the belief that the future could hold something besides solitary survival. Winter passed slowly, as mountain winters do. There were hard days when supplies ran low, and the cold seemed to seep into their bones no matter how high they stoked the fire. But there were also good days, days of sunlight on snow and quiet contentment, days when being trapped together felt less like confinement and more like a gift. Spring came late but arrived eventually, the snow retreating in grudging increments. By April, they were able to return to Rose's homestead and assess the winter damage. Her cabin had survived intact, and the land was ready for planting. Together they expanded her garden plot and added to her livestock, using some of Finn's gold earnings to purchase 2 pigs and another goat. "We need to think bigger," Rose said one evening as they surveyed their combined properties. "Your mining brings in steady money, and my land can produce more food than we need. What if we combined them properly? Built a real operation that could sustain us long term?" Finn was intrigued. "What are you thinking?" "You keep mining, but maybe closer to my land so you do not have to split your time between 2 properties. We expand the farming operation, maybe add a few cattle. In a few years, we could have a working ranch in addition to the mining income. Diversification, like my father used to say. More than one way to make a living means you are not ruined if one thing fails." It was sound thinking, the kind of long-term planning that came naturally to Rose but that Finn had never much bothered with. He had always lived season to season, year to year, never looking too far ahead. But now, with Rose, the idea of building something lasting held appeal. They spent that summer laying groundwork for their expanded operation. Finn scouted new mining sites closer to Rose's property and found a promising claim. Rose negotiated with neighbors for cattle, trading labor, and produce for their first small herd. They worked from dawn until dark most days, collapsing into bed exhausted but satisfied. In August, Rose missed her monthly bleeding. She did not mention it to Finn at first, too afraid to hope after losing Mary. But when September came and went without it returning, she finally told him. "I think I am pregnant," she said quietly one evening after supper. Finn went very still. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it," Rose said. She looked up at him, and he saw fear mixed with cautious joy in her eyes. "I know what you are thinking, that I might lose this one too." "The thought crossed my mind," Finn admitted. "Not because I do not have faith in you, but because I know how much it hurt last time. I do not want to see you go through that again." "Neither do I," Rose said. "But we cannot live in fear of what might happen, we just have to hope." The pregnancy progressed through fall and into winter. Rose was careful, limiting heavy work and letting Finn take on more of the physical labor. But she refused to be treated as fragile, insisting on maintaining her routines as much as possible. Finn hovered protectively, earning him fond exasperation from Rose but continuing anyway because he could not help himself. In early February, during another snowstorm, Rose went into labor. Finn had prepared as best he could, having consulted with the doctor in Reading and studied what books he could find on childbirth. But when the moment came, he felt utterly inadequate. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Rose bore it with gritted teeth and occasional cries she could not suppress. Finn held her hand, wiped her face, and felt completely helpless in a way he had not experienced since the war. Finally, as afternoon sun broke through the storm clouds, Rose gave one final tremendous push, and a baby's cry filled the cabin. Finn caught his son, wrapped him in clean cloth, and placed him on Rose's chest with shaking hands. "A boy," Finn said, his voice rough with emotion he did not try to hide. "Rose, we have a son." Rose was crying and laughing at the same time, holding the squalling infant with exhausted triumph. "He is breathing," she kept saying. "He is breathing on his own. He is perfect." Finn agreed, studying the tiny red face, the flailing fists, the small body that was clearly healthy and vigorous. "What should we name him?" Rose thought for a moment. "William," she said, "after my father. William Xavier." Finn nodded, feeling the weight and rightness of that name. "William Xavier, welcome to the world, son." The next months were a blur of sleepless nights and constant vigilance as they cared for their newborn. But William thrived, growing stronger by the week. Rose recovered from the birth slowly but surely, and by spring she was back to working the homestead with William strapped to her back in a sling Finn had fashioned. They settled into a new routine, one that accommodated a growing family. Finn continued to work his mining claim, but always made sure to be home before dark. Rose managed the expanding farm and ranch operation with William constantly by her side. They hired occasional help during busy seasons, paying with gold or livestock, slowly building a network of neighbors and acquaintances who became something like community. 2 years after William's birth, Rose had another baby, a daughter they named Catherine after Finn's mother. Catherine was dark-haired like her father and had her mother's fierce determination even as an infant. William, now a sturdy toddler, was fascinated by his new sister and followed Rose everywhere, trying to help with his sibling. Life was full and demanding but also deeply satisfying. Finn and Rose had built something real together, something that extended beyond mere survival into actual prosperity. Their combined properties produced enough food and income to support their family and trade for the goods they could not make themselves. They had a home, work that mattered, children who were healthy and loved. One evening in the summer of Catherine's first year, Finn and Rose stood together on the hill, above Rose's original homestead, looking out over land they had transformed through years of effort. William played at their feet, collecting interesting rocks while Catherine slept against Rose's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that day?" Rose asked. "The day we met? The log jam," Finn said. "I think about it all the time. If that blockage had not happened, if you had not been stubborn enough to clear it yourself, we might never have crossed paths." "I think about that too," Rose admitted. "How different my life would be. How lonely." She leaned against Finn, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I am glad that creek got blocked. Glad you came looking. Glad you stayed. Best decision I ever made," Finn said simply, pulling her closer. "You and these kids, this life we have built. It is more than I ever thought to have. More than I probably deserve." "You deserve it," Rose said firmly. "We both do. After everything we have been through, we have earned some happiness." As if in agreement, William looked up and announced, "I am hungry." With the absolute confidence of a 3-year-old who expected his needs to be immediately met, Finn laughed and scooped up his son. "Then let us go home and feed you, little man. Rose, you coming?" "Right behind you," Rose said, adjusting Catherine in her arms and following her husband and son down the hill toward their cabin. Their lives continued in this vein for years. William grew into a serious boy who loved the mining operation and could often be found helping his father with the sluice boxes from the time he was 5. Catherine was her mother's shadow, learning to garden and tend animals with focused determination. They added a third child, another son named Thomas, when Catherine was 3. The mining claim eventually played out, as such claims do, but by then Finn and Rose had diversified enough that the loss of mining income was manageable. They focused on ranching, building their cattle herd to respectable size. Rose experimented with growing wheat, which did surprisingly well in their valley, and they added a small mill to process grain for themselves and their neighbors. The homestead that Rose had once struggled to maintain alone became a thriving ranch that required the efforts of the entire family plus seasonal hired help. Finn built additional structures, a proper barn, a larger cabin, and eventually a second house for when the children grew old enough to need more space. Rose created a garden that was the envy of the county, producing enough vegetables to supply their large family and still have surplus to trade. Their children grew. William, at 16, was nearly as tall as his father and had inherited Finn's broad shoulders and quiet strength. He talked about staying on the ranch, making it his life's work. Catherine, 13 and whip-smart, had taught herself to read beyond what the occasional traveling teacher could provide and talked about becoming a doctor someday. Thomas, 10 and adventurous, wanted to explore the wider world, but always came back to the ranch as his anchor point. One August evening, 20 years after the log jam that had changed both their lives, Finn and Rose sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset. Their hair showed gray now, and their bodies carried the marks of decades of hard labor, but their love had only deepened with time. "I cleared that jam with my bare hands," Rose said suddenly, a statement seemingly out of nowhere. Finn turned to look at her, confused. "What made you think of that?" "Catherine asked me today about how we met," Rose explained. "I was telling her the story, and it occurred to me how absolutely foolish I was that day. I could have hurt myself badly, could have drowned if the jam had given way wrong. But I was so desperate, so determined that I did not care about the risk. That determination is what made me fall in love with you," Finn reminded her. "I know," Rose said with a smile, "and I am glad I did it, foolish as it was. But I have been thinking about why I was so desperate. It was not just about the crops or the animals, though those mattered. It was about proving something to myself, that I could survive alone, that I did not need anyone. And then I showed up and ruined your independence," Finn teased. "You did not ruin it," Rose corrected. "You showed me that needing someone and being independent are not opposites. That asking for help does not make you weak. That building a life with someone can make you stronger than being alone ever could." Finn took her hand, the same hand that had been torn and bleeding 20 years ago, but was now marked with the honest calluses of a life well lived. "We have built a good life, Rose." "We have," she agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was that frightened. Abandoned girl trying to make it on her own." "You were never just frightened," Finn said. "You were fierce, fierce. Our children got that from you, that absolute refusal to be beaten." Rose laughed. "They got your stubbornness too." William would not quit a task if the world was ending around him. "He gets that honestly from both sides," Finn observed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dropped below the mountains, painting the sky in the brilliant colors that still took Finn's breath away, even after decades of watching western sunsets. From inside the house, they could hear their children moving about. Catherine likely reading while Thomas bothered her, and William finished chores in the barn. "Do you ever regret it?" Rose asked quietly. "Giving up your solitude, taking on a family and all the complications that come with it?" Finn considered the question seriously because Rose had asked it seriously. Then he shook his head. "Not for a moment. There are days when I am tired or frustrated, days when the work seems endless and the problems insurmountable. But regret? Never. You and these children, this life we have made, it is worth every difficult moment." "Good," Rose said, leaning her head on his shoulder, "because I feel the same way. Even on the hardest days, I would not trade this for anything." As full darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Finn and Rose went inside to their family. William came in from the barn, reporting that all the animals were settled for the night. Catherine reluctantly put away her book when Rose announced dinner was ready. Thomas recounted an elaborate story about something that had happened in the pasture, half of which was likely exaggerated but all of which was told with such enthusiasm that everyone listened anyway. They gathered around the table that Finn had built 15 years ago, worn smooth now by countless meals and family gatherings. They ate beef from their own cattle, vegetables from Rose's garden, and bread made from wheat they had grown and milled themselves. It was simple food but honestly earned, and it tasted all the better for the effort behind it. After dinner, Finn sat in his chair by the fire and worked on repairing a piece of harness while Rose mended a tear in one of Thomas's shirts. The children scattered to their evening activities, the comfortable chaos of family life settling around them like a well-worn blanket. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, Rose and Finn prepared for sleep with the easy familiarity of two people who had shared a bed for decades. Finn watched Rose brush out her long hair, which was more gray than auburn now, but still beautiful to him. "Rose," he said softly. She turned to look at him, brush paused mid-stroke. "Yes, I love you. I do not say it enough, but I do. More now than ever." Rose smiled, the expression lighting her face in the way that still made Finn's heart skip. "I know, and I love you too, always have, from the moment you walked into that creek and started pulling logs without being asked." "I could not let you tear your hands to pieces," Finn protested. "You could have," Rose countered. "Most men would have. But you did not. You helped because that is who you are. That is why I fell in love with you." They settled into bed together, Rose's head on Finn's shoulder in the position they had slept in for 20 years. Outside, the creek they had cleared together so long ago continued its endless song, flowing through the property that was their shared legacy. The sound was soothing, constant, a reminder of where they had begun and how far they had come. "The log jam dammed my creek for a week," Finn murmured, half asleep, "and I broke it apart bare-handed while you watched." Rose finished, the familiar story, a kind of prayer or incantation between them. "Changed both our lives," Finn said. "Best change that ever happened," Rose agreed. They drifted toward sleep together, two people who had found each other through circumstance and chosen each other through love, who had built a life of meaning and substance in unforgiving country, who had survived loss and hardship and emerged stronger together than they could have been apart. The years continued to pass, as years do. Their children grew and eventually began their own lives. William married a neighboring rancher's daughter and took over the primary operation of the ranch, proving as dedicated and capable as his parents had been. Catherine did indeed pursue medicine, traveling east for school and returning as one of the few doctors in the Northern California territory. Thomas, true to his adventurous nature, worked as a guide and scout before settling down with a wife and children of his own. Finn and Rose grew old together, their bodies slowing but their partnership as strong as ever. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their legacy extend beyond anything they could have imagined. That day they met at the log jam. When Finn was 73, his heart gave out quietly one winter night. He died in his sleep with Rose beside him, the peaceful end of a life fully lived. Rose grieved him deeply, the loss of her partner of 45 years cutting to the bone. But she did not break. She had survived too much, loved too deeply, to let even this final loss destroy her. Rose lived another 7 years, time she spent surrounded by family and working the land she had claimed as her own so many decades ago. She told her grandchildren stories of the old days, of clearing a log jam bare-handed and meeting the man who would become her everything. She taught them about strength and determination, about building a life through honest work, about loving someone enough to weather any storm together. When Rose died at 80, it was spring. The same creek that had brought her and Finn together flowed outside the window, singing its eternal song. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, the family she and Finn had created filling the room with love and memory. She was buried beside Finn on the hill above the original homestead, the place where they had stood so many evenings watching sunsets and counting their blessings. Their graves were marked with simple stones bearing their names, dates, and a single phrase that their children chose together: partners in all things. The ranch they had built continued under William's stewardship, then passed to his children, and eventually to the next generation. The story of how it all began, the tale of a desperate woman clearing a log jam and a mountain man who stopped to help, became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and passed down through the decades. But for Finn and Rose themselves, the story was simpler than legend. It was about two people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose each other day after day for a lifetime, who built something lasting through love and labor and absolute refusal to give up. It was about a creek that stopped flowing and started again, bringing with it not just water but transformation and hope. In the end, that is what mattered. Not the hardship or the struggle, not the long days and short winters, not even the success they built together. What mattered was that they loved each other, raised good children, lived honest lives, and left the world a little better than they found it. The creek still flows through that valley, cutting through land that has passed through many hands since Rose first cleared its jam. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light falls just right, you can almost see them there. A tall man with broad shoulders and a determined woman with auburn hair, standing together at the water's edge, watching the current flow and knowing that they had found, in each other, something worth more than gold, more than land, more than anything else the world had to offer. They had found home, not in a place but in each other, and that made all the difference.